President Bresciani, we know it's been about a month or so since the Higher Ed Board met, and it denied the request of the university for your 0.5% increase. And I guess we're wondering, based on that, I know at the time I think you said that that could result in core cuts here at the campus, and I guess we're wondering what's transpired since then. What have you been doing on campus?
Well, it will result in cuts to the campus. We had been very conservative in requesting the 0.5, and that really, if we had even received the 0.5, there were going to need to be some very careful budget decisions made, because obviously that wouldn't even keep up to inflationary increases. Not receiving the 0.5 does mean that we have to make a bit more substantial cuts. Rather than having that be a top-down approach and trying to have some good come from this, we've used it as an opportunity to assess the entire university community regarding how budgetary decisions and principles should be made in the future. We went to the three senates that make up the collaborative voice of the people that work at NDSU, which would be the faculty senate, the staff senate, and the student senate, and asked them each to consider the principles by which we would want to address budget cuts. And really, that's something that I saw on a long-term basis. Hopefully we won't need, but could apply to future situations as well. And also as an opportunity to measure our campus environment, to see if there was a consistency of what should be our priorities for funding versus topics and areas that perhaps wouldn't be the most priority. Each of those senates has responded with a set of principles for looking at budgetary cuts. We didn't ask the senates to decide what should be cut. I didn't think that would be reasonable or responsible, because that would become a shooting match, if you will. Yeah. And of course everybody would point at somebody else when they were doing it. What we're looking for are philosophies or principles by which we would evaluate our campus priorities for doing so. And each of the senates has responded and with some very thoughtful documentation.
What would be ranked at the top? Was it, I don't know if, and again, you said you weren't asking them, but I know that they had somebody had supplied me with a list here and how to enumerate them and that, but what was the consistent thought there, at least where to go with this? What
was consistent was that there wasn't any consistency. Each of the groups offered, as I say, very thoughtful and provocative priorities and principles, but I didn't see a consistent theme arise from those, which is helpful to know all in itself.
Mm-hmm. What does that 5%, and I know last year things came together rather quick towards the end of the semester when, you had asked for, and were finally granted, but you were faced with even some worse decisions. You were eventually granted the 8.8, but I don't know that you had the time or the ability at that point to gauge the community or the university as a whole to get that feedback. And that, what does this 5% loss of this mean in terms of money, or what could you kind of...
The scale of this is much more manageable than the situation we faced last year, which fell after we would have had the opportunity to solicit feedback from the campus community, just coincidental timing of that. That would have involved a cut of, illustratively speaking, not that we had even had the opportunity to identify it, but the equivalent of closing 2 or 3 academic departments. Obviously, that would have had profound implications, not simply for our faculty and staff, but particularly for our students. We're seeing universities around the nation in states where their economies are in collapse having to do that. Both South Dakota and Nebraska have had to have major departmental closures impacting hundreds of students, leaving them in a sense stranded. This situation was much more manageable. We're looking, 0.5 represents somewhere between a $400,000 to $500,000 cut. So on one hand, that's certainly a substantial amount of money. That's almost $500,000. On the other hand, North Dakota State operates with about 1/3 of $1 billion a year budget. So in a relative proportion, that's much more modest than what the implications of not receiving the 8.8 the year before would have been. What we'll be looking at, and if I was going to somehow try to blend all the feedback we've received from the three senates, I think it would be fair to frame that as looking at cuts that would have the fewest obvious implications for the instructional and educational environment at NDSU. In other words, things that would not overtly and immediately impact our students' educational experience. It's easier said than done, of course, after a decade of cuts that have taken place here, trying to manage our budgetary situation. There's nothing left to cut, and that's where we start using the term core academic functions. But you can always shave. You know, people talk about cutting down to the bone. Well, there's bone then. And we'll try to shave that bone versus cut that bone. I'm probably overextending the analogy, but the point being that we want to do everything possible to preserve the educational environment here. Our students last year, in unanimously supporting the 8.8% tuition increase, made a very strong statement that above all else they don't want their educational environment hurt. And for students to step up and say, raise my tuition as a means to protect my educational environment speaks, I think, very highly of how important that environment is to our students, our faculty, and our staff who joined with the students in supporting that. That
said, you and your cabinet, I guess, or whatever, will still face some very difficult decisions, as you said. And
absolutely.
What have you even begun to identify those areas yet? Or and I don't know how you go about even I mean, I know you have to do a lot of research and everything like that, and you probably get as many answers as questions you ask for out there.
Exactly.
I can imagine so.
You know, and of course, people are now lobbying for what should and shouldn't be on the table. But in fact, we just received those reports back from the Senate within the last few days, and haven't had a chance to analyze those.
Okay.
Well, I shouldn't say to proceed with analyzing the situation.
That will be a help, though. It'll give you some point of direction. While you didn't have specifics there, they gave you whether, I would assume, maybe cuts in staffing and that probably were ranked.
Where they perhaps might be helpful would be what not to do, and those would be fairly obvious things. Anything negatively and directly impacting the in-class environment, the elimination of positions that are filled by someone, in other words, job loss of actual filled positions. Those are probably the two main themes.
Do you have a time frame or that you would like to have? I know you're probably required by in some point to have this done, but what's your time frame in making a decision here?
In some senses, it would be self-imposed, and that would be the fiscal year. So obviously, July 1st. Since coming to NDSU, I've been adamant that we will not operate with a budget that's not balanced, and through a lot of hard work by our Vice President for Finance and Administration, Bruce Bollinger, and the faculty, staff, and students across the campus, a budgetary situation that I think would have taken longer to put it in alignment than did has taken place. Some extraordinary work on that front. I just find it unacceptable to not have a completely balanced budget, and we're going to maintain and honor that. So to do that, you have to have your budget in alignment at the beginning of the fiscal year, in my mind. And so it's no one's told me a timeline. That's a self-imposed timeline.
Okay, by July 1st, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't notice that you've got too many more gray hairs since being here, but something that has probably irked you, and I know you've talked about this before, and we talked about it last year, late April and May when you were going through all of this. What's at issue, at least many feel, is the flawed. There is a flaw that some believe in the way the money is divided and how it is unfair to NDSU, and that I would assume as you look at this, you're looking down the road and thinking that the legislature, and I believe it probably has started some baby steps in trying to correct that, or at least there's some thought out there, and that's your hope that this is not going to be an every year issue for you to have to go back to the chopping block here and do this.
Oh, sure. And I think now it would be fair to say there is widespread, I won't say unanimous, but widespread understanding that the formula for funding of the higher education institutions in North Dakota is broken and doesn't work. Obviously, at the last State Board of Higher Education meeting, the president and vice president of the board were fairly outspoken in recognizing that. I think other board members would agree with that. I think most presidents in the system would agree with that for differing reasons, perhaps. This isn't just about NDSU. It's broader. UND is also underfunded when you think of those two institutions being the flagship institutions. And clearly the legislature has recognized that. At the close of the last legislative session, they mandated, they didn't request or encourage, but mandated that a new formula for funding higher education be used to create the budget for the upcoming biennium. That process is underway and is an obligatory one, and I'm enthusiastic. I think NDSU, while it's not just about NDSU, our situation had become so bad and so inexplicable that it perhaps was the poster child for the need for a new formula.